Due to the graphic nature of this urban legend, listener discretion is advised. This episode includes descriptions of fire and drowning. We advise extreme caution for children under 13. Only you can prevent forest fires. Or rather, only you and your 40-man team of arson investigators, park rangers, and environmental scientists. You're all searching for the source of a blaze that started 6 days before. You and your team make your way across the field toward the tree line, noting the positions of ash and char. Then, you hear a shout. One of your young investigators is pointing up to a pine tree, gesturing wildly. He turns to run toward you, but you tell him to calm down. You're worried that if he moves too quickly across the search area, he'll disturb the evidence. But as you step closer, any hope of doing your job goes out the window. Your gaze rises higher and higher up the scorched ponderosa pine and into the blinding light of high noon. And there, silhouetted against the sun 200 feet up, is a scuba diver. Welcome to Haunted Places, a Parcast original. I'm Greg Polson. Today's episode is part of our Urban Legends series. Every Tuesday, we explore those chilling stories you hear secondhand, the kind that seem made up, but contain a kernel of truth. Urban Legends is only on Spotify, so keep listening here to never miss an episode. But don't forget to come back each Thursday for a classic episode of Haunted Places, covering yet another ghost-filled locale. You can find episodes of Haunted Places and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify. To stream Haunted Places for free on Spotify, just open the app and type Haunted Places in the search bar. Today we examine an urban legend that is more of a puzzle than a cautionary tale. The story of the scuba diver in a tree has appeared in crime procedurals, the Darwin Awards, and even Paul Thomas Anderson's 1999 film, Magnolia. But it remains a popular mystery to this day. Up next, we step into the burned remains of a forest and meet the scuba diver. In the late 1990s, the Darwin Awards, a list of the supposedly silliest ways to die, published a strange entry that took place in the woods of rural California. A group of wildfire investigators had found a man 200 feet in the air, impaled on an ash-covered pine tree. He was decked out in full scuba gear, but that wasn't even the strangest part of the story. What was even more bizarre was that though his wetsuit was effectively melted to his body, his cause of death wasn't the fire. It wasn't even blunt force trauma or internal injuries from the massive hole left in his abdomen. The strangest part was that he drowned. People tended to call Sawyer a thrill seeker. His adrenaline junkie friends did it for the rush. But Sawyer was different. He wasn't chasing a natural high. In many ways, he was chasing confidence. Each risk told him that he wasn't ruled by his fears. He'd climbed Everest. He'd been strapped to the wing of a plane in order to surf it. He'd even eaten a sit-down dinner suspended by a crane 150 feet above ground. But there was one fear that he never quite mastered. When he was a child, Sawyer's family lived on a small plot of land surrounded by large pine and fir trees. It was idyllic. They captured fireflies in jars all summer long and played outdoors until the sun went down. He was 10 when a storm had blown in from nowhere. The whole house shook with the violent wind. Sawyer hid under the covers and prayed to any god that would take him to keep him safe. In the next room over, he heard his little brother crying. Rain leaked in through the holes in the roof. Sawyer watched the water creep in and wondered which would kill him first, the lightning or the flooding. A gnarled branch of light had flashed in the sky, and Sawyer heard a loud creak and a groan, like a dying animal. After that, things got hazy. There were scars all over his hands from where the roof caved in, trapping him beneath debris. He was lucky. Next door in the younger boy's room, a Douglas fir had plummeted into their house, burying him beneath a pile of rubble. Sawyer's parents were too overwhelmed by their grief to recover his brother's body. So Sawyer faced his first fear and tried to find his brother himself. He pulled away broken wood and drywall for what felt like hours. But when Sawyer finally reached him, he wished he hadn't. His little brother's head had been entirely crushed in by the tree. It was a turning point. His family moved into the heart of the city after that. Sawyer couldn't face the trees. Every time there was a school field trip to the surrounding national parks, he faked an illness. And any time he flew, he shut the windows, so he didn't have to see the forest below. For years, he never left the city for any reason. But now, decades after his brother's death, he felt ready to face his greatest fear. So, he trained to be a park ranger. Being surrounded by trees was overwhelming. Sawyer's co-workers mistook his intermittent heavy breathing for wonder. In truth, he couldn't stop the panic from rising through his body. He could see them, all the pines, firs, and redwoods falling all around him. It didn't help that he and his team were now sifting through the debris of a partially burned-out forest. California had over 147 million dead trees, and each presented a potential danger to humans who moved beneath their branches. Not only did the dried and decaying wood increase the fire risk, but the slightest movement could accidentally send a 20-foot pine hurtling toward the ground. But Sawyer was resolved. He would overcome his dread, or die trying. Now he was thinking about dying again. Wonderful. He forced himself to gaze back up at the great firs and pines, many of which stood between 200 and 300 feet tall. Bark peeled off the trees like skin after a sunburn. The sour smell of dead animal carcasses hung heavy in the air. Sawyer swallowed the bile in his throat and put a yellow flag in the dirt to mark the bodies. Then his co-worker Randy joked about the squirrels being flattened like pancakes. Sawyer braced himself against his thighs as the world spun around him. He tried to keep the images of his brother out of his mind. It had been years ago, he told himself. That was a different scenario. He was safe. But the foreboding creak that had rung in his ears for decades after his brother's death had come back. He could hear the echo of shouts in the distance, then the all-too-familiar thump of wood crashing to the empty forest floor. Overwhelmed by his thoughts, Sawyer struggled to breathe. He realized that maybe he wasn't ready to face this yet. Maybe he could pick up training again next year. A large hand slapped his back. Sawyer pulled himself back to his feet as Randy watched him suspiciously. Sawyer steadied his breathing and mustered a weak smile. But Randy didn't smile back. He just nodded to the trees. Sawyer was confused, but Randy wasn't giving him any hints as to what he was nodding at. The crew ahead of them was eerily quiet. They were all standing frozen, mouths agape, craning their necks to look at the top of a charred pine in the distance. A strange shape seemed to be impaled on top of it. A human shape. Sawyer's legs buckled. He could face his own death 1,000,000 times over, but if he had to see a firefighter's dead body, he wasn't sure he could stay conscious, let alone help his crew. Some of them were already conferring, trying to decide how to cut the man free, and debating whether it would need to involve potentially cutting him. Seeing Sawyer's panicked expression, Randy told him to grow a stomach and walked off toward the tree. Sawyer told himself he could run. He could turn around right now and never look back. He didn't have to face this. But his feet followed after Randy's, as though he wasn't in control of his body. As they stepped closer, he reminded himself that he was safe. This was some freak accident. It would be fine. Maybe all of his death-defying experiences had deadened his nerves. He might not feel anything at all. Thankfully, by the time they reached the crew in the clearing, the silence was broken. They were talking amongst themselves when Randy asked them why they had gone so radio silent. But no one answered. Instead, one raised a glove-covered finger toward the sky. High above their heads was a dead body. Or Sawyer assumed the man was dead. He hoped he was, because what he saw from their vantage point was frightening and strange. The corpse was covered in melted black neoprene. It created a strange patchwork pattern on the skin, broken up by bubbled third-degree burns. Several tree branches had punctured the person's torso, and coagulated blood coated the lower branches. Sawyer forced himself to squint, pulling out his binoculars. His vision swam for a moment as he racked the focus. The dead man certainly didn't look like a conventional firefighter, but he was wearing the usual regulator and mask, with an oval disc of glass covering his face. The air tank was strangely intact despite the heat. Then, Sawyer saw the fins. This wasn't a rescue worker or a firefighter. The man in the tree was a scuba diver. A crimson droplet of blood fell from the corpse, landing on Sawyer's cheek. He felt the ground swirl around him. Then, there was nothing but the cold dirt against his head. Up next, Sawyer gives up everything to try and solve the mystery. Hi, it's Greg. If you're looking to add some more fun to your feed, subscribe to Parcast Network's new show, Incredible Feats. Every weekday, comedian Dan Cummins, who you might recognize from the hit podcast Time Suck, explores an unbelievable account of physical strength, mental focus, or bizarre behavior. Don't miss the story of the man who broke the sound barrier while skydiving from the edge of space, or the harrowing tale of a 17-year-old girl who survived alone in a rainforest for 11 days after her plane broke apart mid-air. Or the ultramarathoner whose rare genetic condition lets him run for days without stopping. Incredible Feat spotlights mind-blowing achievements of everyone from world-class athletes and record breakers to scientists, architects, artists, and more. Search Incredible Feats and follow free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Now back to the story. Sawyer came to slowly, nearly passing out again when he looked up to see the scuba diver still impaled on the tree. Shaken, he volunteered to leave the scene and radio for help, anything to get as far from the diver as possible. Eventually, a rescue team arrived to help remove the body from the tree. The other guys on the crew were dumbfounded, but before long it became nothing but a bizarre anecdote of training. But Sawyer was rattled. The image haunted him for weeks. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He needed to understand what had happened to the diver, because the diver was like him. The dead man's name was Patrick Roth. He was a self-professed adrenaline junkie too, but his obsession was reef diving. He explored shipwrecks and hunted for buried treasure. He sought thrills, but his ex-girlfriend had told authorities that he didn't do heights. So what was he doing at the top of a tree amid the remains of a massive forest fire wearing diving gear? Sawyer kept up with the case even after it went out of their jurisdiction. He told the local police that he was just intrigued by the strangeness of it all. It was just simpler that way. Telling them the real reason would have made things too complicated. The police told him that Patrick had taken his boat on a trip up the coast, from San Diego to San Francisco. He planned to solo dive every reef between Southern California and the Bay Area. His ex admitted it was stupid, but again, that was why she was his ex. The missing boat still hadn't been found, and the autopsy report gave more questions than answers. There were a series of contusions on the skull, in addition to the large holes in Patrick's torso. But no evidence of smoke inhalation. In fact, his lungs were filled with water. Patrick Roth had drowned in the middle of a forest fire. Sawyer's nightmares of his brother's death stopped. Now he dreamed he was wandering through the woods, while burned and mangled divers hung from each tree, like gnarled moss. No matter how far he went into the endless night, he would still find those dangling, half-burned flippers. Then, near the end of the dream, the plastic mask over the diver's face would start to twitch and loosen. He always woke up before he found what was hiding underneath. And every time, he was grateful. For some reason, he couldn't picture an actual human behind the mask. Melted eyeballs oozing down the face were more than his stomach could handle. After learning more and more about Patrick, Sawyer developed a brand new fear: diving. He was a certified diver himself before the incident. He loved cave diving and had explored the infamous Eagle's Nest sinkhole in Florida and the so-called Temple of Doom cave system in Tulum, Mexico. He knew there was no way that even a dangerous dive scenario could result in impalement in a California forest. But it had for Patrick Roth. Sawyer couldn't even look at scuba equipment anymore. Just submerging his head in the bath made him uneasy. It was more than a little embarrassing even to admit to himself. So he had a new challenge. He decided to get recertified in diving, just to get his feet under him again. The first day of lessons was overwhelming. He struggled to breathe as soon as he put the goggles over his eyes. And when the instructor put his hand on his back, all Sawyer felt was fire. At least the process always began in an indoor pool. His body slipped under the surface of the water, but his muscles were too tight to do much else. After a few moments of willing his body to swim, to do anything, a pair of neoprene arms wrapped around him and pulled. The instructor dragged him to the edge of the pool. Sawyer ripped off the mask and wiped away the tears with chlorine-covered hands. The instructor offered to give him a break. They could even take a few days off. But Sawyer responded by submerging himself again. He could do this. His life was about fighting through the fear. As his lessons progressed, Sawyer still struggled to get his breathing under control. His oxygen tank always depleted too quickly. The instructor warned him that in a life-or-death scenario, he needed to be more careful. Coming up too fast could kill him. Sawyer joked that he'd taken worse risks, but there was no confidence in his voice. Still, he refused to give up. He bought his own set of equipment online and decided that it was best to rip the Band-Aid off. He'd go scuba diving off the coast by himself, just like Patrick Roth. Once he had done it, he knew he'd get over it. That's how it had always worked in the past. If he just did the dive, he'd be able to let it go. He hoped. Sawyer stared at the ocean as the sun rose up over the water. It was almost peaceful, but his wetsuit felt as if it was choking him, and his heart was jackhammering in his chest. His hands shook as he doused his goggles in seawater before putting them on. He reminded himself that the suit wasn't trying to kill him. Logically, he knew that, but there was something about it that felt cursed. His skin burned where the neoprene pinched. Every twist of his torso conjured up visions of a tree branch tearing a hole into his body. At any moment, the wood would burst out of his stomach, and he'd breathe his last. He dove into the water. He expected the icy water to be a welcome change. Instead, it almost burned. It felt like he was surrounded by fire, licking and ripping at his skin beneath his suit. Still, he kept going. Sawyer knew he needed to watch his gauges and take everything slow. He started with a small descent into the reef below, and for a second, he was at peace. The creatures around him were alive, moving, and colorful. He was in the beautiful alien world of the ocean. He wasn't dying. But then, kelp tangled in his flippers. Sawyer tried to kick himself free. Why did the seagrass look so much like a swarm of leaves? His breath got caught in his throat. His chest contracted. The trees had found him here. If they couldn't slide through his organs with their long branches, they would drag him to a watery grave. Sawyer struggled against the pull of the grass. His rapid breathing was depleting his oxygen too quickly. He'd been warned about this. He knew what to do. He just couldn't find the air to do it. Help came from an unexpected source. The water was vibrating, and small creatures were swimming past him to escape. Whatever it was creating enough of a disturbance in the water that Sawyer could free his flipper. He hoped that it was some sort of a boat. But when he looked up, he realized how wrong he was. The long rails of a seaplane were several hundred feet above him, and the pure force of its spinning blades was creating waves on the water's surface. As the plane came closer, a large cable dropped from its belly. Sawyer felt the pressure change almost immediately. His instructor had warned him that sudden changes in pressure could kill him. Sawyer didn't know enough to understand if he should be worried or not. As soon as the cable touched the water, everything changed. Fish were sucked up through a giant vacuum. A whirlpool churned around him with an almost supernatural force. Sawyer tried to swim away from its path, but the pull was too strong. He fought against the manufactured current, his limbs flailing in a cyclone of water and dead fish. Then he felt the pressure in his head growing as the swirling salt water and gravity-defying suction carried him up into the sky. Sawyer had one moment of absolute clarity before his world went dark forever. The plane carried its hose and bucket over a raging fire and hovered above the blaze. The bucket tipped, spraying a flood of ocean water on the climbing flames. Amid the thousands of gallons of stolen sea, a small dark shape floated and then fell, plummeting toward the inferno. Sawyer landed on a tree with a wet, sickening crunch. He slid down ever so slightly, stopping at a subtle tilt. There his body stayed, impaled on the branches, his still eyes gazing down at the burning fire below. The first version of The Scuba Diver in a Tree originated in the early days of the Darwin Awards. The original post is very detailed, offering readers an explanation not only of how the diver came to be at the top of a tree, but also a number of specifics. It includes estimated distances, and even how much of the fire the diver's bucket possibly extinguished. These not-so-comforting numbers give the legend an air of legitimacy. However, it fails to include some other important figures. For instance, helitankers, the industry term for helicopter water bombardiers, can carry up to 2,600 gallons of seawater to forest fires. But they don't use buckets to collect water. Instead, the liquid is sucked up by hoses with openings that are only 4 inches by 10 inches wide. They also have grills attached to their ends to protect any unlucky sea creatures, or scuba divers. There's only one actual record of a human being harmed by a helitanker, a woman who was swimming off the coast of Corsica in the Mediterranean. She made no actual contact with the craft or hose itself. Instead, she was caught in the waves it left behind. She suffered a bruised leg when she was thrown against a landing platform, but was otherwise unharmed. The Scuba Diver in a Tree begins with the appeal of a logic puzzle, but ends with the macabre thrill of a freak accident. A scuba diver swimming off the coast of California shouldn't have to worry about being an unwitting accessory in the fight against the state's wildfires. After all, there are so many measures in place to prevent that from happening. But once you know the story, you do worry, don't you? Thanks again for tuning into Haunted Places. We'll be back on Thursday with a new episode. And don't forget to come back on Tuesday for our Urban Legend series, available only on Spotify. You can find more episodes of Haunted Places and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify. Not only does Spotify already have all of your favorite music, but now Spotify is making it easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite Parcast originals, like Haunted Places, for free, from your phone, desktop, or smart speaker. To stream Haunted Places on Spotify, just open the app and type Haunted Places in the search bar. Until next time, don't believe some of the things you hear. Believe all of them. Haunted Places was created by Max Cutler and is a Parcast Studios original. Executive producers include Max and Ron Cutler. Sound design by Kenny Hobbs. With production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Joshua Kern. This episode of Haunted Places was written by Lil D. Ritter and Jennifer Richey, with writing assistance by Greg Castro. I'm Greg Polson.